Agent itself is kind of a buzzword that will probably fade with time, but the whole concept I don't think will ever go away, because it's about giving agency to AI, allowing them to do things for you. And it's about sort of improving your life and augmenting your capabilities as a human, building from the ground up to get to the point where we have the agents that can do very extremely specific tasks very, very well. And then from there, you build multi-agent orchestration so that any of the agents can be used by a single app. And then it becomes like a true sort of AGI, and that you have specialized agents that can do any of the tasks extremely well. There is no end state, really. It's more building that foundational layer all the way up until we can do these really successful agents. And then there's an infinite number of agents you can build on top of it. That's a perfect example, because it's something that's, in my opinion, pretty crucial to the success long term of Bittensor, having total privacy. But in and of itself, like, that's just an algorithm. It's not the product. So I don't know how you really sell it, because unless you add a commercial license to the algorithm and try to sell it that way, it's just going to be open source, and you're not running those encrypted models. The best subnets have the goal matching the incentive. A classic example of this is the old file tau subnet. They would always tout how much storage they had and stuff, right? And you would think, like, as a miner, if I want to mine file tau, I need to have hundreds of petabytes of data, of hard drives, or SSDs, whatever. And as it turns out, there was nothing that checked your capacity or like had anything to do with capacity. It was just the response times to arbitrary offset checksum requests, basically. So, even though they would, and the way that the metrics that they gave to the public were calculated was that as a miner, when you unlock certain tiers, you're allowed to have more storage. So if I'm allowed as a miner to have a terabyte of storage, I might only have 50 gigabytes, but I'm allowed to have up to that much. And so what they would advertise is the amount of allowed capacity, not the amount of actual capacity. And the amount of data that was actually stored was basically just the synthetics used for these tests. And then the incentive was based on how quickly you ran these tests. And really what that meant is be in Europe, very close to the OTF validator with a really fast cache system.
Welcome to the Ventura Labs podcast. Today, we're joined by Jon Durbin, elite solo miner turned subnet developer, who shares his insights on AI, blockchain, and automation. From open source fine-tuning to developing the Chutes platform, we explore the challenges of transitioning from mining to subnet ownership. We explore AI development, automation, and the potential risks and benefits, including job displacement and career shifts caused by future innovations. Now, back to Jon with the 25th Ventura Labs podcast. Jon Durbin, how are you doing today, my man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. I'm talking to you. So I want to start with, how did you get involved with Bittensor? What brought Jon Durbin to the Bittensor ecosystem?
Yeah, so I was doing a ton of open source fine tunes on, just posting them on Hugging Face. So I had like the Ouroboros models and Bagel and a bunch of data sets. I built a tool for doing synthetic data generation. So it would actually, are you familiar with the term model distillation?
No.
So basically, it's just you run a bunch of prompts through a frontier model like ChatGPT or Claude or something like that. And then you fine tune open source smaller models with that data. So you're actually distilling a lot of the capabilities of the larger models into the smaller models. So I got started in LLMs doing this synthetic data generation. And I was in contact quite frequently with some of the guys from Noose. And some of their models, I think they actually included some of the Ouroboros data sets in their fine tunes. So I saw, because I was kind of keeping up to date with them, I saw that they had started a subnet, and I had no idea what that even meant. or what Bittensor was. I've not. I did actually have Bitcoin back in like maybe as early as 2013 or something like that. Not much, but just
Oh.
playing with it. And and of course, like everyone else at the time, I sold it all for nothing, probably pizza or something. But yeah, so I wasn't involved much in crypto. But I was involved in AI. So I saw Noose and their subnet, and because I was doing so many fine tunes, and they had a fine tuning subnet, I was like, oh, that'd be fun to try. So yeah, I got onto the old subnet 6, and it's yeah, from there history.
Yeah, so new subnet 6 was John's first subnet for everyone wondering. And then that subnet dropped off relatively quickly compared to a lot of other subnets that I know you mine on. So
Yeah.
what made you expand from subnet 6? You got to 6 and then you were like, "Hey, let me take a look around?"
Well, so um, yes, I mean mostly I wanted to expand, but there were also some problems that I saw with subnet 6 that I wanted to stop bothering with it. So, for example, they used a stream of data from Subnet 18, right, to do their fine tunes. And if you actually looked at some of the data coming through, a lot of the requests or the responses from those models were just outright refusals. So, the fine tuning data would say, like, I'm sorry, but I cannot comply with your request, or, whatever. Or it would just be like error messages that it can't connect to the upstream API, or, Chat GPT's API. So there was a lot of just noise and garbage in the data sets. And, I would, because I built a lot of data sets, I spent a lot of time kind of doing data quality. And when I saw stuff like that, I wanted to remove it and clean it up. But you would actually get higher loss on your models if you didn't include some of the trash, because that's what the eval was on. So stuff like that was really annoying. And then, of course, people were just copying models. They were doing model merges. A model merge is basically you take, so at the time, say there was three top miners, you could take a tool called merge kit and actually combine all of the weights of those three models into sort of like a Franken model. And then that oftentimes, you could just do random permutations of model weight, per model. And then sometimes they would actually outperform the other models. So a lot of people were just doing these merges and winning without actually having to do any work. There's no data set involved, no fine tuning, no nothing. It was just model merges. And I mean, congrats, it worked. They did produce higher scoring outputs, so fine. But it was just frustrating to see. So yeah, so then I just wanted to try out other subnets, and then the first one, other than Noose, I got on. I'm pretty sure was Subnet 27, because it was really easy at the time, and um, I had access to cheaper H100s, so I threw that on there, and then I got on to Subnet 26 really early, 23, the old Wombo, yeah, a bunch of them.
So 27 compute, they're still the same as when you first started launch or when you first started mining on it. When do you decide when do you decide to move off of a subnet? You start mining there, and if it's still registered, do you go till it dies, or when do you decide to move off it?
I don't have any particular guidelines. It's more just, is the subnet profitable, right? That's a big one. Is it serving a useful purpose? Um, so whether I make money or not, like, do I feel like it's actually doing something of interest for Bittensor? Like, is it a useful subnet? The other thing I always consider is, do I just let people displace me because I don't need that mining income, right? So there's that, where Like I could still be mining 23 and some of the other ones. I just don't because I don't need to, so I just don't. And I don't think it's good for a single entity to like fully monopolize all subnets, right? I know there are some bigger mining groups out there that have a huge presence, but usually I would only mine like maybe 40 UIDs at most on a subnet. So just paring that down, the amount of time that it takes to mine, depending on how many updates the subnet does. And then, of course, with Chutes, I just don't have time for anything other than that now. So,
So Chutes is Jon Durbin's main focus. He's
yes.
shifted from mining half the subnets to his own subnet. What was that transition like from prolific miner to subnet owner?
Yeah, so technically, I don't own the subnet. And we could talk about that if you want. But so Rayon Labs, Namaray's organization, they own the subnet. I'm technically just a contributor to it. And the reason is mostly for like taxes and regulations and stuff like that. So, um, in the US, you're liable for any revenue when it comes to crypto. Like the second the coin is minted, you're liable for whatever your tax rate is on that. And same with like revenue to the platform because we take crypto payments, we would have to track capital gains and all that stuff. So it's a massive nightmare to try to do in the US. And that nightmare can change depending on who is the administration at the time. So whether it's a crypto friendly person now doesn't necessarily matter because what happens if it's totally upended in 4 years, right? So yeah, I don't own it. Just to be, if the IRS is listening, I don't own it. um, but yeah, it was. I've been a software engineer mostly. My entire career. So, and I have done a lot of AI, like traditional ML type stuff, but I wanted to get back to building more than just like optimizing other people's code. And that is fun and it's a challenge and all that stuff. And but yeah, I wanted to build something, and I thought that you know I kind of mentioned it on Bittensor Guru, but we have compute subnets, and there's definitely a use case for those. A lot of times you just need like not bare metal, but just a bare machine for experimentation and stuff. But I really felt like there was a huge gap in compute specifically for Bittensor with the stuff, like statelessness and things like that. So part of it was, I just had a desire to build my own thing. And of course, talking to Namaray, who's a legend in Bittensor, he had kind of the same idea. We were just brainstorming together, and we kind of both had the same thoughts on how the whole thing would work and what the problem is and how we would tackle it. Um, and then yeah, just trying to fill that gap. Bittensor needs a compute platform that is well suited for Bittensor with minor deregistrations and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that was the idea.
And to say you were just a contributor to Chutes, I feel would be an injustice and an understatement when you look at the GitHub commits. So,
Yeah,
for anyone wondering, I recommend checking out the GitHub commits. But, um, okay. Um,
yeah. I think Chutes between all of the different repos has something on the order of like 34 or 35,000 lines of code already. And that's growing quickly.
and Chutes can host any code that can be Dockerized, correct?
Yep.
So
Yep, that's the
it
whole idea. Is it's just bring your code and we'll handle all the infra.
so that means it doesn't even necessarily have to be open source code only that you guys can run.
Yeah, so we do have private images, private shoots they're called, but there is a caveat to that. So we have the miners need to be able to pull those images to be able to run them, and there's no getting around that. And miners are not obligated to sign any SOC 2 compliance or HIPAA, you know, and nothing. Like there's no SLAs, there's no anything. So in theory, the miners can pull those images and expose the code and do whatever. If we found out about that, we would probably try to punish that miner somehow with the incentive mechanism. But yeah, I mean, private is maybe a stretch. It's not open to the public. How about that?
Is there a world where you guys could make that secured in some way to where it would be private?
Yeah, there's actually, so if you look at Brainlock, the subnet that's so they're trying to work on encrypted inputs and outputs. And that's actually a huge problem with Bittensor in general, is that you really can't have broad public usage in a lot of ways unless you can guarantee that privacy and security. And so something like that is actually hugely important for Bittensor long term, I think, for broad adoption and for things that aren't just like who cares if the data leaks out. And so something like that, where the actual model weights are encrypted and the inputs are encrypted, and the miner, even if they did try to expose the code, they wouldn't see anything. It would just be random bytes. So something like that. The very second that subnet produces an on par performance model, then yeah, we'll host it on Chutes, and then problem solved.
So you think it would be more so on like a model basis, not a platform as Shoots as a whole would move to encryption?
Well, so we do have encryption, right? The problem is that those Docker images, if you had proprietary code, those Docker images have to be pullable by the miners. And you can do things like PyArmor. There are tools for like encrypting and obfuscating Python code, or you could build like a C binary with virtualization and hiding all your symbols and all that kind of stuff. So there are ways to build for the Shoots platform that would be sort of completely encrypted, but on our end as a platform, we do have encryption, and that's actually part of the validation mechanism. Is we built a custom GPU validation library that uses device info, um, and like our own proprietary algorithm. So it essentially uses device info seeded with a random seed from the validator to do matrix multiplications, and that set of matrix multiplications will continue until all of the VRAM is consumed to make sure you have the proper VRAM that you claim to have. Um, and so the payloads that come from the validator are encrypted specifically to the GPU that you're running. So as a miner, it's all automatic. You don't have to do it manually, but when you add a new GPU to inventory, it builds a custom encryption for that GPU. And then if you try to run something on a GPU that isn't the one we've already validated, the miner wouldn't be able to see the payload anyway. Um, and then we also do like file system checks and a bunch of other things. And that's one of the reasons why we can run arbitrary code is if we validate the entire file system, we validate the graphics cards that they're saying, and then we can also validate the outputs because we randomly sample the responses. It doesn't really matter. Like you wouldn't be able to change the code as a miner anyway, and get away with it. So the code that runs doesn't really matter. Whereas like on Subnet 4, for example, you have to do these non-deterministic fuzzy checks for validity of the output using log probs and things like that, because you can run any inference system you want. Whereas on Shoots, the user that built the chute is saying, this is what I want you to run. I don't care if you can optimize it. Don't. Just run what I told you to. So it's a very different thing. But we do, like, this is a long tangent, but yes, we do have encryption. And there are things in place where, like for regular LLM calls, we have logging disabled so the miners can't see the requests that are coming in. And if they were to try to modify it to see those requests, it would fail the file system check because then you've modified the code. So
Is the only way to sort of hide the user's like intellectual property would be something like a full like what Brainlock's trying to do?
pretty much, yeah.
And then you guys also have an agent platform coming.
Yeah.
What is that going to look like once it's completed?
Yeah, so it's going to be so if you think about what an agent is, it's really just a set of tools that are kind of orchestrated together. So a tool could be something like a web scraper, right? Where you just say, if your task is tell me who invented the telephone, it could probably just pull that from the model weights, but it could also theoretically use a web search, go find that information. And then another tool could be, I don't know, a calculator. There's an infinite number of tools you could have. And then an agent is sort of like an overarching LLM that takes all of the tools and the task you're trying to do and then orchestrates those tool calls until it completes the task. And so if you look at some of the agent platforms that already exist, mostly what they're doing is just like Twitter responses, right? Is one of them, or just random tweets. And it's cool, it's very fun, but it's not necessarily all that useful. There are also coding agents, and all they do really is kind of like go through entire Git repos and build, new modules or fix bugs or whatever the case may be. And I think the highest scoring models on the software engineering bench are still not doing that great, but it's progress. It's a whole lot better than just trying to do a single prompt and getting a response. If your repo is tens of thousands of lines of code, you're not going to get it in a single prompt anyway. So the existing agent frameworks are mainly geared towards those types of things, either coding or like Twitter bots. And the idea with our platform is really to make it completely unlimited capabilities because on Chutes, since you can run totally arbitrary code, you can do any type of tool that you want. So we have, like, just to go through some of the tools that we already have deployed, we have LLMs, of course, for generating text, but we also have vision models. Vision models can understand, they can like, you can ask questions about an image or a video. We have multimodal models that can also do audio. There's Whisper for transcription. There's image generation. We have OmniGen, which can do image to image. So you can like take an image of you and say, put a giraffe in the background, and then, so you'll have a new image. And then we have speech to text. So, and then we have a bunch of other tools that we're trying to build. So the idea is that, yes, text to text for Twitter bots is cool, but what if it was also, hey, here's a tweet that has a podcast. Tell me, how many different people were in it, what they were talking about, and if a balloon showed up anywhere in it, right? I mean, it's a simple task, or it's like a weird task, but that's just going to show you that to use that or to accomplish that task, you have to use those vision models. Maybe you have to do transcription. Maybe you do speaker diarization, which is a way to classify how many different speakers there are. And then you have to generate a response. So, and then you also need a web scraping tool to go out and download the video and all this stuff. So it's building completely arbitrary tools that can run on Chutes extremely cheaply because we pay by this. It's micropayments. You pay by the second, and because it's totally permissionless and has headless payments, the agents can actually write their own code too. They can write their own tools as needed. And so what we're trying to do is take the whole idea of all these open source models, build a massive toolbox for agent use so they're not just limited to responding with text to tweets, and just opening it up. We have really powerful models, but a lot of them aren't necessarily all working together cohesively. So we're trying to just make that really easy. We do have X integration, so you can do your Twitter bot if you want, or your X bot. But you can also just prompt it with any modality: images, video, audio, text, whatever. So it's going to be a really powerful, sort of easy button for agents that are highly capable.
And this is a front end app you guys are developing that will have all these capabilities?
Yeah, so really it's Chutes that's running everything. And then the front end app, like the agent framework, is just making use of all of those Chutes to execute. But as a user, you might just say, you know, go accomplish whatever task. And then when it launches, it will start looking at all of the inventory of tools on Chutes that already exist, and then building new tools automatically without you having to do anything as a user to accomplish the task. So
Will you guys allow for uh, OS level permissions, like operating system level permissions, where the agent can go do things for you on your behalf?
well, that would be up to the user, right? The controls. So it's going to be an API initially, and there will be a website as well. Um, Now, if you wanted to build an app that could control your mouse and your keyboard and stuff like that, that's an easy next step. You would just take screenshots of your computer and maybe record the audio, and then pass it to one of these vision models, and it would direct the mouse to go wherever and do the keystrokes and stuff for you. But we're not building at that level yet. We're just building the way to get the outputs. So the logical step after that, if you did want fully autonomous control of your computer, would just be to tie those outputs back into an app that has that OS level control. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this what Apple Intelligence kind of marketed to be in the beginning in the commercials is what you guys are
Yeah.
making possible with the AI agent platform that you want to do or gonna do, not want to do. You are doing it.
Yeah.
Um, you said you might be doing that in the future, the OS level type of permissions on your end, like you guys build that out. How do you decide where to allocate your time? How do you decide what's the highest ROI for Jon Durbin's time in what you're
Yeah.
deciding to build?
Well, yeah. Part of it is just what sounds interesting to work on, but usually that lines up pretty well with what the market is after, right? So um, there's a reason people are so excited about agents, and like agent itself is kind of a buzzword that will probably fade with time, but the whole concept I don't think will ever go away, because agent, it's about giving agency to AI, right? It's allowing them to do things for you, and it's about sort of improving your life and augmenting your capabilities as a human, right? um, and so the more agency you can give these things, if you can trust that it's doing it correctly, the easier your life will be. So I think that is extremely exciting. And I think there are going to be a lot of proprietary players that are closed source. And I want to just make that open to everyone, and make it sort of a commodity, right? That's one of the whole ideas with Shoots, is make execution very cheap and on demand and pay per use, not like a massive running subscription. And so, the two things that really excite me are uh, agents like the concept of agents, not that buzzword, because I know people are already getting very frustrated with that and think agents is dead, or whatever. But the the fundamental concept of agents, I don't think will ever go away, and I think it's just going to keep getting stronger and stronger. And bringing that to open source, like enabling it on open source models and commodity compute, is just going to open up a lot of doors to people that might otherwise be closed. So
the idea of agent in most people's mind and the purpose is more so just to automate tasks that are medial tasks. Like it started with an assembly line creating cars, maybe.
Yeah.
And then now it's getting to more advanced stuff like coding software. In a world where everything becomes an agent and becomes automated to where you don't have to spend your time doing it anymore. What would you spend your time on? Is that when people just pick up hobbies and it's all kumbaya and we sit at the beach? Or is that world not achievable?
Um, I don't know that it's. I think at some point we'll just hit physical constraints. Power consumption of these models, for example, in data centers, things like that. Um, if you were to automate everything, unless there's a sort of a fundamental breakthrough in the transformer architecture or like switching away from transformers, it's going to be hard to have everything be on this type of architecture just because of the compute involved. There's a lot that can be automated, surely, but the yeah, I don't know. I don't try to predict these kinds of things because it's so out of my control anyway that even trying to really think about it just hurts my head. But I think unfortunately, a lot of jobs will probably get automated away. We've already seen it. A lot of things like, I don't know, copy editing and marketing and responding. Like a lot of companies already have auto responders for Twitter and stuff from user complaints and stuff like that. So there is a lot of automation that will, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your financial situation, make you have a lot more free time. And I think it's extremely unhealthy for humans to not have something they're driving towards. Hobbies are great, but if you don't make it sort of like a goal to achieve something specific, like a hard task is going to give you a lot more purpose and meaning, I think, than just like playing video games or whatever. And maybe that is your task. I don't know, but for me, I would probably, I do a lot of like blacksmithing and woodworking, and I live on 20 acres out here, so I'm never running out of things to do. Cleaning up the yard or cutting down trees for my woodworking and all that kind of stuff. So I would find something to do, but I think for a lot of people, they would have to find what that purpose is, right?
Yeah. It almost comes full circle with we now go back to do the things like you say, just chopping wood and blacksmith work for fun essentially.
Yeah.
Um so you think power is going to be the biggest constraint to automating all of these tasks? If I heard you correctly?
Well, it's not necessarily the biggest constraint. It will be a constraint. It's, I mean, if you have, what was Elon Musk's new X data center? I think it was like 100,000 H100s
Yeah, something
in
crazy.
one data center and like the cooling towers for it are just outrageous. And, that's a model or like a small subset of models doing some things, maybe powering Grok. And I don't know if they use it for like the Tesla self-driving automation and stuff like that. But, so that's a massive amount of power and resources. Is it TSMC or whatever that is the only producer that can build these chips in the first place? So we're already bottlenecked on getting the chips, um, and then building these massive power plants. California has power problems all the time, and they're also pushing for fully electric by 2030 or whatever. And they already have to ask people to shut off their air conditioners and stuff like that. So if you think about like electric vehicles plus data centers plus everything else, I mean, we're already getting to the point where finding enough power is sort of problematic in some places. And if you want to automate everything, I mean, that demand goes way, way up.
Do you think it's more likely we see breakthroughs on the power front in terms of producing more power or on the efficiency side of needing to consume less power? Which has
Yeah.
more room to see benefit from or improve?
Well, I would hope it's the latter. I hope we improve the efficiency of these algorithms. That's almost always the case. I mean, we're already a lot more efficient than we used to be, but um, yeah, it's like if there are these more efficient algorithms, they already exist. They just need to be written down on paper, right? Like math isn't something you create; it just kind of exists, and you eventually discover it. So I'm hopeful that there are alternatives to transformers that are a lot more efficient that just haven't been implemented yet. And there have been massive breakthroughs on things like context length. Like the Google models can do 2 million tokens now or something outrageous. So that's, all corporate documents that you have or something can fit into a single prompt. So I have no doubt that that will continue to improve. On the power side, I, I have no idea.
And as someone building like on the cutting edge of these automation type tools and technologies that enable this automation, what industries or jobs or sectors do you think will see the biggest displacement from this new age of automation that's coming?
I think it actually sort of counterintuitively affects software engineers almost more than anything. I mean, why would you hire like if you just need a website built for your mom and pop store? Why on earth would you hire a human to do that now when you can automate it in like $5 worth of compute, probably less, um, and have it be better maybe than if you hired like a fresh out of school grad or something. So yeah, it's kind of weird, but I think all of us in this industry are somewhat automating ourselves out of jobs. Um, Now, I don't think that we're quite there yet. I mean, I can't at the level of coding that I do a lot of times. I might use Claude or ChatGPT or whatever to kind of brainstorm and stuff, but the answers are never just like copy paste. You always have to tweak it or adjust it for your platform, or maybe the library is slightly out of date, or maybe it does something slightly less efficient. So if you're not, so if you're at like a senior dev or architect level or something like that, these tools are extraordinarily useful, but they're not quite like just plug and play yet. But I think junior devs and things like that are going to have some problems. And I think the more reliant people get on these tools, the more difficult it will be for them to get to the senior level anyway. Because if you just kind of copy and paste and hope it works, and you don't really know fundamentally what the code is doing, it's going to be really hard for you to troubleshoot and debug and things like that. So that's one thing, people always give me a hard time for, but I refuse to use Devin or any of these other uh, or Copilot or basically any coding AI tool. And I don't even use an IDE. I just use Vim on my terminal. Because if someone were to ask me today, like, hey, can you write a complete web app in Python on a piece of paper? I could say yes. But most people at this point, even before a lot of this AI stuff, just because of Google and Stack Overflow, the answer would be no. So I don't know. Maybe that's hurting my productivity, but I would say, make sure you at least practice doing that sometimes to make sure you don't completely lose your skills, because then you will get automated away.
Yeah, all the highest level developers I know all say they have abnormally low levels of automation usage in their code compared to other people. That is a common trend among the high level developers that I have seen. As someone with a master's in computer sciences became one of the most popular majors in the US, at least, I would say. What new positions or new opportunities will this automation open up for these people? Because there is likely to be a mass displacement of jobs there in the software engineering front.
Yeah. Um, that's a good question. I don't really know. Yeah, I mean, at this point, I would say it's probably better if you if you're having a really hard time finding work or something, even with a degree. Um, Skilled trades are in super high demand and they pay pretty well. So maybe it's time for a career change.
Okay, okay.
I,
That's
but yeah, I mean, it's hard to think of any field related to computer science that couldn't be automated if the models got to a high enough level. Um, yeah, I mean, because that's the whole thing, right? Is and I think O3, the new ChatGPT O3, when they're talking about its performance, the fact that it can do like 78% or whatever it was on expert level, like domain expertise level stuff, exceeding human performance in pretty much any category. Like that is almost AGI to an extent, right? Because they're beating humans at any subject, whether it was already in their training data or not, because they're abstracting. So if that's the case as well with software engineering, I don't know how you could compete really. I don't know what those jobs would look like. So yeah, that's a tough one.
Do you think we'll ever hit the point where these AI agents mine Bittensor on their own and they go out and they do what you did
Yeah,
and find different subnets?
yeah. Well, isn't that what Omega is trying to do with their new? I don't know if it's on testnet still.
Oh,
I think they have.
the Tau agent 62, Agent Tau.
Yeah, aren't they trying to build software engineering agents and eventually
Yeah, that might
specifically
be in the
to mine
roadmap.
Bitcoin?
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
the roadmap too closely, but
yeah.
it might be. How far off do you think we are from that? What is the biggest hurdles we have to overcome to that be for that to be realized?
Well, I mean, there there are cases now where you can actually sort of fully automate mining. Like the one of the subnets that I still mine is subnet 4, and they change models from time to time. Um, and as a miner, you have to actually start supporting that model if you want to get good incentives. And so that's actually something that I've fully automated. I don't look at the servers. They spin up on their own and provision themselves and find optimal parameters for the model based on the number of attention heads and the size of the model and all this stuff. It's like uh so some subnets like that, yeah, I mean, you can automate them today if you wanted to. And the stuff that I built to automate that could have been written by open source models like DeepSeek. It's not, rocket science, some of the stuff that I'm doing there. So today I would say you probably could, same like in that respect, pretty much any inference subnet I think you could probably automate.
Interesting. I guess then would the problem be deciding which task to make the end goal of let's automate this? Would that be the hardest part for an AI to decipher of which subnet to pick?
Yeah, I think the hardest part right now would probably be more there's no, well, there are actually, so maybe that isn't a problem. I was going to say the payments, like actually paying for the servers. Um Most companies still basically do either wire transfers or credit cards, and you need a human in the loop for that process. And so, like, you could have your bot do everything, but then you would still need to like rent servers, and in some cases, these companies require KYC and stuff like that. Um, so I mean, using Chutes, you could just pay with Tau and then have the bot do it all automatically. So you could actually launch your miners on Chutes and then problem solved. But But yeah, I think that, and then sort of like the general economics of it might be sort of tricky for the bot to understand because there are a lot of factors on some subnets where you can't just run, like on subnet 19, right? You have to support a certain number of models as a text miner to even start. You won't even get like a single bit of incentive unless you have all the models supported, basically. And so trying to figure out where that threshold is of like how many miners do you actually need before your break even point of how many servers you need to get even a single UID on board. Um, there's some tricky equations you have to do there, and like how long the immunity period is before you can determine if you're going to be competitive or not in the first place, and when do you pull the plug if you're not making traction, and all these things. All of that can be done, but personally, if I just had like a bag of tau sitting around and I wanted to automate it, I would be paranoid that it would be making the incorrect choices. Um, because none of the models are perfect. I mean, even 78% on the domain expertise test is not 100%. So that money can go away real quick if it does start making the wrong choices.
Let's give it some training data then. What was Jon Durbin's
Yeah.
approach to
Right.
picking a subnet?
Yeah. And the Omega guys, I mean, maybe that's what will happen, right? The Omega Focus app. Maybe top miners just need to start recording their workflows every day to feed into Omega Focus, and then that can be used to train these Bittensor bots.
Yeah. But with the renting compute space, yeah, they can use Chutes now.
Yeah.
They could have also used something like a Akash. Is that something you ever used when mining?
No. No, I've only ever done just bare metal, through
Oh,
I've
okay.
used a ton of hosting providers, but yeah.
What were your go-tos for the hosted providers? What were your favorites?
I've used recently it's pretty much all through Shadeform, and they're sort of like a reseller of a bunch of different hosting providers. So through Shadeform, you can get Mass Compute, Latitude, Kudo, Valdi, Boost Run. I mean, there's a ton of them. Data Crunch. Some providers have explicit no crypto, terms, and some providers are a lot more friendly towards it. So you either need to hide that really well, or just use friendly providers.
Yeah, yeah. John never did anything crypto on it, if you guys are listening.
No,
Ever.
never. Nope.
Strictly AI research. That's it. Um, I guess what does your future look like? Is Shoots it? And you just sell off into the sunset after Shoots? Or do you have other plans?
Well, Shoots is sort of, in some ways, it's like a means to an end in general, because really what it is it's an enablement for any other app. It's not the app. It's like the thing that the app needs to be successful in a lot of cases. And so it's like building up. If you wanted agents, right, you need the platform that can run them very efficiently with all of the tools that you might want. And so we didn't really have that yet in any of the Bittensor subnets. We had inference for images and inference for text and some other things, but we didn't really have all of the things. And even if you did have all of the things, they were all in completely different systems with different access methods and different API calls and different everything. And so the foundational layer for everything else that we may want to build, including agents, is having that compute infrastructure that can just run any code that you want at any time, permissionless. You just build the Docker container and run it. So agents is the next evolution of that, right? Or like not even agents specifically, but the agent platform. So that's another layer of like foundation where it's still not really the end goal, it's the way to get there. So you have the agent platform, that will in turn use the Chutes platform to run all of these things. And then on top of that, you can build extremely powerful task specific agents that are sort of like the end state. So, one end state agent, for example, might be price prediction, where it can go search the web and pull the company's reports and look at the stock market data and look at the news and do all this financial analysis. And maybe then it also allows you to call the API to actually make trades, right? So that would be one agent, and that's like the app. That's the thing that you actually want to build, and you need these other two layers to get there. So for me, it's sort of building from the ground up to get to the point where we have the agents that can do very extremely specific tasks very, very well. And then from there, you build multi-agent orchestration so that any of the agents can be used by a single app. And then it becomes like true sort of AGI, and that you have specialized agents that can do any of the tasks extremely well. So there is no end state really. It's more, building that foundational layer all the way up until we can do these really successful agents, and then there's an infinite number of agents you can build on top of it. So I don't really see necessarily an end state where I have achieved anything. It's more just being on this path of building up the whole system.
And is that kind of similar to how you would view miners? Would you view miners as just the means to an end? Like, um, in terms of what they produce, they're just doing what they're told, essentially, and that end goal is determined by the subnet architecture, the incentive mechanism. How do you view what miners are producing? Is it just simply following the rules?
In a sense, yeah. It's really, I view it more mostly as like a chess tournament or something, right? You have some rules, anyone can join. You have a winner or set of winners, and that's kind of it. The problem is the rules are often so either loose or poorly written that the actual outcome is not what you intended. Um, so there's oftentimes a massive mismatch between intentions and the actual incentive mechanism. And so what miners do is they compete in that game, and who cares what the actual outcome is? I mean, most of the time, like I always try to actually do the thing that the subnet wants, and I'll help. Like I have PRs and certain subnets trying to help them kind of get there to at least adjust the incentive mechanism or better align it. But really, it's most miners, they're just trying to get the max incentive, right? And that's what they should do. That is the goal. I mean, that's the whole point of the incentive mechanism, is to optimize for it. So it's really not anything that the miners ever do that's the problem per se. It's that the goal and the intention, or like the incentive and the intention, is not aligned always. Um, and so the best subnets have the goal matching the incentive. And like a classic example of this, if you ask me, is the old file tau subnet. So they would always tout how much storage they had and stuff, right? And you would think, like, as a miner, if I want to mine file tau, I need to have hundreds of petabytes of data, of hard drives, or SSDs, whatever. Um, and as it turns out, there was nothing that checked your capacity or like had anything to do with capacity. It was just the response times to arbitrary offset checksum requests, basically. So, even though they would, and the way that the metrics that they gave to the public were calculated was that as a miner, when you unlock certain tiers, you're allowed to have more storage. So if I'm allowed as a miner to have a terabyte of storage, I might only have 50 gigabytes, but I'm allowed to have up to that much. And so what they would advertise is the amount of allowed capacity, not the amount of actual capacity. And the amount of data that was actually stored was basically just the synthetics used for these tests. And then the incentive was based on how quickly you ran these tests. And really, what that meant is be in Europe very close to the OTF validator with a really fast cache system. Who cares about the actual storage? Just worry about the cache. And so that it's like you had an idea, the idea was great, decentralized storage, lots of capacity. But when it came down to actually mining, the only thing the miners cared about was storing the synthetics and having access to those quickly, which serves no real purpose, essentially. So, yeah, that's something you should always think about. And so, like, from knowing this, from mining all the different subnets, I always have a pretty good understanding. Like, the first thing I ever do when I look at a subnet is you go read the validation code. The mining code doesn't matter. Go read the validation code. And, you look at how they're scored, how the miners are scored, and that's the only thing that really matters. So, you know, knowing that when I'm trying to build a subnet or an incentive mechanism, I'm trying to look at it from what do I actually care about happening on the platform, and what are the ways that the miners are going to try to game it. And there's still a lot more work that every subnet needs to do. I mean, if you say that there's like a, cheat proof subnet, I'll show you a liar, right? Um, so there's always work to be done, but that's the goal. Every subnet should say, what do I want? And am I 100% sure that my incentive mechanism matches my intention?
And you would say that's the biggest distinguishing factor between the high level subnets and everybody else?
It's a massive factor, yeah. Part of it is just utility, or sort of what the total addressable market is, things of that sort. But yeah, I mean that's a if your incentives don't match, then I mean, yeah, it's going to be gamed, and the output is not going to look good, and then you're going to have a hard time getting traction in the market, because if your outputs aren't good, why would people use it, right?
What do you think was your biggest mistake throughout your BitTensor career of mining? What was something that you think you could have improved on or done better?
Yeah, I mean, early on, it was exactly that: reading the README and trying to optimize for what the subnet said.
Yeah.
Yeah, because because that's not what the validation code has half the time.
It's not as well. Do you think that's still as big of a problem as it used to be? These subnets saying we do this, but in reality they're actually doing this?
No, it's massively improved, massively improved. And in some cases, it's more the fact that there are just sort of like technical limitations to get the incentive thing that you want. Like 26 is one of the first subnets that I mined, for example, and they have a sort of a very difficult task of trying to decide which images are better. So you give out a prompt, and then you get some images back from the miners, and how do you judge which one is better? And there are some programmatic ways you can do it. Like they were using clip score, so you can do like sort of semantic similarity between the text prompt and like the semantic embedding of the image kind of thing. Um, but then really you sort of want humans to do that judgment. So they actually built the human validation bot. So you can go on there as a human and actually vote on the images. But even then, it's sort of like if there's a grid that has 9 images and 8 of them are identical and one is different, your eyes are immediately going to be drawn to the one that's different, whether it's actually higher quality or not. the fact that it's different just sort of tricks your mind into saying, oh, well, that one's better because all the other ones are the same. Um, and so, unless you have like extremely diligent humans going and doing these ratings, even that is sort of subject to tricks. And then clip score, then if you're just using these programmatic methods, then you're only going to have models that are fine tuned for that clip score, and the actual output might be trash because it's sort of exaggerating the features. Like if the prompt was, I don't know, someone eating an orange on the beach, um, it might just be like sand that's orange or something like that because the embedding space will match very closely. So, yeah, it's really difficult. I'm not saying anything. I'm not trying to disparage any of the subnet owners because I understand it's an extremely difficult problem to solve. But that's sort of why I think the problem exists.
And now you're on the other side of that problem. You're the one
Yeah,
creating the code. How
yeah,
how much has that transition been made easier because you were such a prolific miner?
yeah. I think I would have had a much harder time um, building certain safeguards, I guess, into place. So, uh, like DDoS attacks, right? That's one of the things that just happens a lot on Bittensor, unfortunately. Like it's happening again right now on Subnet 4, evidently. So, and these are massive attacks. And so, had I not had to deal with all of those, I would have done like every other subnet and just had miners announce an axon, and then your IPs are visible for anyone to see, and then you get DDoSed and you go down. So a lot of that kind of stuff. Same with like GPU validation. Like there was that bug on Subnet 51 recently where someone claimed to have 10,000 GPUs on a single server. It's physically impossible. Um, you know, and it's just a hard problem to solve. So seeing those kinds of things a lot as a miner, it helped me like build the foundational layer. I'm sure someone at some point will exploit Chutes. I have no doubt. But I tried to put enough in place that it's at least like as annoying to do the exploit as it would be to just do it right. So just do it right. And that's the goal. Is like you need to make the exploits not worth the time to do them. It's not that you can't do them. It's that even if you accomplish the exploit, you're not going to get that much more reward than if you just did it right in the first place. And so that's kind of like the biggest thing for me in sort of building the mining code is and the validation code is like how many layers of annoyingness for exploits can I put in so that you might as well just do the right thing.
It's just about raising the cost
Yeah.
of doing the wrong thing so the incentive looks better. What types of sectors or tasks or jobs do you think map best to the BitTensor subnet architecture and can become subnets?
Um, that's a good question. So I think it's really a tough question with detail right around the corner because I think it changes the dynamic and the whole sort of mentality of BitTensor in a way because right now Tau is the coin and it funds all of the projects. And a lot of the projects are extremely useful, but may not necessarily be monetizable. And so the beauty of just regular Tau is that these sort of utility subnets still get the funding that they need. Like, for example, like the brain lock. That's a perfect example because um, it's something that's, in my opinion, pretty crucial to the success long term of BitTensor having total privacy. But in and of itself, like that's just an algorithm. it's not the product. So I don't know how you really sell it, because unless you add a commercial license to the algorithm and try to sell it that way, it's just going to be open source, and you're not running those encrypted models on Brainlock. You're building the algorithm and then running it elsewhere. So the money that you can actually make on something like that, if you're an outside investor with DTAO, why would you invest in that in a product that can't really make any money? Now, that's just from my outside perspective. I have no idea. They probably have monetization plans, all of that stuff. I have no doubt. But just looking at it, at a cursory glance, that's what I would say. So when DTAO happens, some of these extremely useful subnets might kind of have some problems, and you'll see more inflow towards the things that actually make money. Um, so, my answer depends on pre-DTAO or post-DTAO, because post-DTAO, I think it's all about, which ones are commercially viable, and people will invest in open source projects too. I mean, that won't just go away. But for the average consumer, I think the first thing that they look at when they're thinking about, I mean, it's just like investing in a company right now. You look at what's your ARR? What's your customer growth? It's not, hey, is your project cool and open source? Um, so I think that's going to be maybe a problem. I really don't know. I mean, what's that quote? It's like markets will remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. So, maybe my rationale is actually irrational, and people will just continue to pour money into open source projects and everything will be fine. But so, yeah, I mean, my opinion right now is that the best suited projects for Bittensor post DTAO will be the ones that have a clear path towards monetization, and the ones that are solving problems that not many other companies are solving.
So in other words, it's the ones that can make the most money to run the biggest buyback programs if you apply it
Yeah,
to traditional finance in the stock world. Huh. That's
yeah.
so I guess the counter argument is the amount of money you're able to generate should in theory be directly correlated to the amount of value you've created. Would you say that's an accurate representation? Or is there another way that we should think about it?
Well, yeah, value you created, but then the problem is tying that back to the subnet itself potentially. So, like if we just continue to use Brainlock as the example, okay?
Shout out Brainlock.
Yeah, shout out Brainlock. So if we use them as the example, suppose Shoots is really successful, but we're only getting people using it for like Twitter bots and fun stuff and things that aren't really like secrecy, or like that don't require privacy. Um, and we have a certain amount of revenue and everything else. And then Brainlock is successful in building an algorithm that guarantees full, complete privacy and encryption. And then that enables the Shoots platform now to have customers in healthcare, in government, in whatever. How big are those industries? So the value that they produce is extremely valuable for Shoots, but it doesn't in turn go back to them. So it's that mapping that's the problem. Is like the value of the thing that they produce. Same with like fine tuning subnets and things like that. The value that they produce might be tremendous, but it might not actually correlate to the subnet itself.
And then that could also hurt the value they can produce because then the incentive is less to, you know, spur innovation in that sector. So you think DTAL will create the value capture problem all over again for companies?
Maybe, maybe.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, I
I
mean
could
that would
definitely.
be my logical guess. But again, markets and the way that they behave. I mean, fart coin is a thing, so it doesn't matter if there's actual utility or not. Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. And then now you work with Rayon Labs, but you've been solo, or I assume solo, for basically your whole history. What was the hardest part of being solo, a solo miner?
Well, the yeah, so with Rayon, I'm not technically a part of Rayon. I just um have access to their GitHub. So and again, it's all just like taxes and legal stuff. It's not that I wouldn't want to be. It's just it's easier to structure it that way because of international stuff and everything. But yeah, so being a solo miner is great and terrible because it's great in the sense that you're not dependent on anyone else, and there's no one else that can sort of hinder you. But there's also there's always going to be a limit to your capabilities, um, and so there may be things that you don't really know how to do, and it's really hard to find people who are willing to share alpha on mining Bittensor. So um, so there's that, and then also just obvious things like I can't be awake 24/7. So if my servers go down in the middle of the night, I'm either gonna not sleep and then have a horrible day and be a bad father to my kids and everything else, or I just lose my miners and let it go. If you have a team that's big enough, you might have shifts, and it's not a big deal. Um, I know one miner, for example, they have a team and they have an overnight person, and that's great. But if you're a solo miner, good luck.
And there is speculation you have a team behind you. So just to clear that up, is it just Jon Durbin, or is there an army of contractors?
No, it's just me. I don't know. Yeah, I have conversations with people sometimes, like bouncing ideas and stuff like that. But no, I don't even put my mining code on GitHub, for example, as a private repo because I would be worried that someone would just go either it would get compromised or whatever. So I help people. Like I do actually help people a lot of times, and mostly publicly in the channels. I'll share tips, or like with DDoS protection, I'll help people get set up on that stuff like that. But yeah, no, just me. And then my toddlers sometimes smash the keyboard for me, so I guess if that counts, I don't know.
That seems like it'd be more so a setback than useful contribution there. But hmm, I'm trying to see if I'm missing anything that I wanted to talk about here. John, I'll actually, what legacy do you hope to leave on Bittensor once you're done? You're through with Bittensor. Will you be here
A
forever?
bit tenser. Um, so yeah, I don't know that I want to leave any legacy. I mostly don't want to leave sort of a negative legacy. That's the only thing I'm worried about. I don't want my presence to have tainted the network. So if I get away, whether it's positive, as long as it's not negative, I'm happy. Tread lightly.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I'll ask you one last question here, and we'll wrap it up with this. What advice, what advice do you have for miners, for developers in Bittensor, since you're now also on the subnet front? What advice do you have for devs in Bittensor?
Yeah, so for mining, ignore everything you think you know about the subnet and go read the validation code. I mean, truly, that's the only way to really succeed is just forget everything, go read the validator code. And then get really good depending on what the constraints are of validation. If it has anything to do with latency or speed or anything like that, start getting good at identifying where the actual physical servers are of the validators and optimize accordingly. So, yeah, read the validation code, start there and work your way backwards. And half the time, you might have to rewrite the entire miner base code, but it's worth it, if you have a good feeling of what it's supposed to do. And then, yeah, like I said, for the subnet owners, is just do your best to try to align your intention with the incentive. And yeah, I mean, and it's okay to, I think, acknowledge. A lot of people um, sort of are like afraid of the idea of exploits. But if you sort of change your mindset into thinking that exploits are free QA for your product, um, that's kind of the way that I am going to look at it. Is like, an exploit means my product was not robust enough. That's all it means, and so I need to do a better job and fill that gap. So, sort of maybe don't be afraid of exploits, but also, do your best to try to make it annoying to be exploitative if you can. But I've only been in the subnet game for what, a few weeks, so I don't really. My advice should not be taken very heavily. So
John, I'm sure your advice will, everyone will cling to every last word. But it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you,
hey,
John.
thanks for having me.